I get it, you're staring at your current network rack, wondering if it's finally time to upgrade, but the thought of dropping a few $100 on a switch that ends up collecting dust is enough to make anyone pause. I was in the same spot last month, juggling a growing office with a handful of IP cameras, a few VoIP phones, and a new 10-gigabit server that needed reliable uplinks. I started Googling best PoE switch for small business and found myself buried under endless spec sheets and marketing hype. The risk of buying something that either overpromises or underdelivers is real, especially when you're trying to balance performance with a tight budget. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. After a couple of days of reading the manufacturer's datasheet, scrolling through forums where IT pros talk about power budgets, and even watching a couple of YouTube teardown videos, I landed on the NETGEAR 28-port Ultra60 PoE Smart Switch, model MS324TXUP. At first glance it looks like a straight-up more ports, more power solution, but what matters is how those ports translate into everyday workflow. If you've ever tried to power a dozen security cameras and a few wireless APs off a single switch, you know that the total wattage you can draw matters just as much as the number of ports. This model gives you 24 PoE++ ports with a combined 720W budget, plus 4 10 Gbps SFP Plus slots for backbone connections. That's a lot of juice, but does it actually make life easier, or does it end up being a kitchen sink approach that most small offices don't need? Let's start with who should seriously consider this unit. If you run a boutique office, a co-working space, or a small retail chain that relies on a mix of high-power devices, think PTZ security cameras, digital signage, and Wi-Fi 6 access points, you'll appreciate the 60W per port ceiling that Ultra60 PoE++ offers. In my own setup, I have 8 4K cameras that each pull about 12W, 3 Wi-Fi 6 APs at roughly 10W each, and a few desk-side VoIP phones. All of that fits comfortably under the 720W cap, leaving headroom for a couple of future devices without needing a second power injector. The built-in smart management software also gives you a tidy dashboard where you can see real-time power consumption per port, shut off idle devices, and set schedules for when certain cameras should power down after hours. That level of control can shave a few dollars off your electricity bill over the year, which is a practical win. On the flip side, if your network is primarily a handful of workstations, a single NAS, and maybe 1 or 2 access points, you're probably overpaying for the power budget you'll never tap. You could get by just fine with an unmanaged gigabit switch that costs a fraction of the price and still get the job done. The extra management features VLAN tagging, CoS prioritization, and the ability to push firmware updates from the cloud are great, but they add a layer of complexity you might not need. If you don't have anyone on your team comfortable with configuring VLANs or setting up PoE schedules, you could spend more time tinkering than actually benefiting from those capabilities. Now, let's talk about the practical strengths that show up once the box is open and the rack is humming. First, the mix of 1G per 2.5G ports is a sweet spot for most mixed-use environments. My older desktops still run on 1 gigabit per second, while my newer video editing workstation needs the extra bandwidth of 2.5 gigabits per second for fast file transfers. The switch automatically negotiates the speed, so I never have to manually force a port into a specific mode. Second, the 4 10 gigabits per second SFP Plus slots give you a future-proof way to aggregate uplinks to a core router or a data center link. In a recent test, I linked 2 of those ports together in a 20 gigabits per second LACP bundle, and the throughput held steady even when all the PoE devices were drawing near their maximum power. That kind of headroom is rare in a switch at this price point and means you won't have to replace the unit when your bandwidth needs double in a year or 2. Energy efficiency is another often overlooked benefit. The switch complies with IEEE 802.3AZ, which means it can dynamically lower power consumption on idle ports. In practice, I noticed a modest drop in overall rack power draw when I turned off a few of the PoE cameras at night via the management interface. It's not a massive savings, but every watt counts in a small office where the power bill is scrutinized monthly. What about the downsides that you'll feel once you start using the thing day in, day out? The first thing that trips people up is the initial learning curve of the smart software. The web GUI is clean, but the deeper settings are nested under several tabs, and if you're not used to concepts like port mirroring or LLDP mediation, you can end up staring at the screen for longer than you'd like. NETGEAR does provide a quick start guide, but it assumes a baseline familiarity with managed switches.